This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
A very good morning to you. Today we are talking about using group chats as CPD. What can we learn from each other just informally every time our phones buzz?
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is Saturday, the 20th of September, 2025. This is the Saturday Breakfast Show here on Teachers Talk Radio with me, your host, Darren Lester. How are you doing? How has your week been? We always like to start Saturday breakfast with a bit of a check-in. Use our Saturday as a way to decompress, to reflect on the week before another busy one begins. I had a really good week. And I'm really happy to say that that's, I think, how I've started all of the shows so far this academic year. So touch wood, long may it continue. I believe I had to touch wood about something last week as well. We get very superstitious here at Saturday Breakfast as we slide into the autumn. But yeah, this has been quite a good one. Long-term friends of the show may recall that last academic year didn't start off so well. And so I've been kind of waiting for something to go wrong. But so far, we have almost made it to the end of September, and we are doing well. We are still on top of everything, and we are thriving. So hopefully that will continue as we now, I was going to say slide into half term, but we're not really doing that, are we? Because we've still got about 5 weeks, I think. But as we start to justify thinking about half term, thinking about getting ready for that next break. So yeah, I've had a really quiet one this week, which has been good because it's allowed me to get ahead. And for me, that's really important. I've done a show, a few years ago now, one of my first shows here on Teachers Talk Radio, I think, where I was talking about the importance for my own self-care of getting ahead in my work, of being confident that all of my lessons for the next 4 or so weeks were planned, all of my lines for my scripts were learned. I like to be on top of things. I need to be on top of things for my mental health. And we talked about how sometimes self-care, well, no, not sometimes, all the time, self-care isn't the same for everybody. And so while for some people self-care might be sliding into a bubble bath and watching a film on their phone, for others self-care is about putting the work in, getting the things done so that they are confident, so that they're happy sort of moving forwards. And that's why I think self-understanding is really important in our line of work. You need to know how you work best, and you need to know what your brain and your body needs in order to thrive, in order to be its very best. And that's why we don't judge either here on Saturday morning breakfast. If it is 9:09 and you are having a Bloody Mary with your breakfast, we're not judging that. As long as it's not becoming a bit of a problem, that's all good. I'm not advocating it, but we're also not judging it, because we just do what we need to do in order to survive. That went into a very different place from where it started. That was not what I was planning on saying at all. Why do I plan this show when I just go off on a bit of a tangent anyway? So yeah, I've been able to get ahead this week, which has been really good for me. I have been able to kind of plan a whole bunch of things, which which works because I know that next week is going to be very, very busy. And I definitely won't have as much time to plan things as I have had this week. So it has been good for me to make the most of that time. So yeah, we are good with that. I hope that you feel that your week was equally successful, equally productive. And if you don't, I'm very sorry that it wasn't. I'm very sorry for whatever it was that kind of stood in the way. But hopefully you can take some time over the weekend to kind of reset yourself to make next week the very best week that you can.
At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With teachers for students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
SEND funding is in the news again, as Schools Week's Freddie Whitaker talks about funding rates and inflation after a report from a committee of MPs found that funding rates for pupils with SEND would be around 40% higher today if they had kept pace with inflation. The amount of notional funding in a mainstream school's budget for delivering SEND support has remained at £6,000 since the system was reformed in 2013, as has the £10,000 base rate special schools receive for each pupil. Now, a report from the All-Party Parliamentary Group for SEND warns that despite increases in funding, the system remains fragmented and under-resourced. It goes on to say the lack of inflationary increases in budgets have resulted in the increasing and earlier pursuit of education, health and care plans, and that this in turn has led to the subsequent increase in high needs top-up. According to the report, the notional funding, if it reflected inflation, would now be worth £8,386 and special school place funding would be worth £13,998. The group has called on government to base funding allocations on robust assessments of need. Government will set out SEND reforms in a white paper later this term. In a linked article, the recently appointed Minister of State for School Standards is reported as telling MPs that the voices of children, their families and teachers will be at the forefront of SEND reforms. Georgia Gould told MPs pupils shouldn't have to travel miles for support, early interventions for support should be prioritised, and there will always be a legal right to additional support. Full details of Ms Gould's comments can be found on the Schools Week's website. The Times Educational Supplement magazine says head teachers in Wales are to get protected leave during weekends and holidays. The article covers comments by the Welsh Education Secretary, who says leaders must be given uninterrupted rest after years of campaigning by the union NAHT Cymru. Lynn Neagle has written to all local authorities asking them to ensure that school leaders are not contacted during weekends and holidays unless there is a particularly pressing need. There is no indication that this move will be replicated in other parts of the UK. The letter says contact at these times should be in exceptional circumstances which require head teachers' urgent attention. Laura Dole of NEHT Cymru said it had been a long campaign for protection because over time we have seen mission creep, with leaders' goodwill too often abused and frequent work outside of regular hours being taken for granted as somehow normal. She added that leaders needed to be well rested so as to be in a better place to provide the first-rate education children deserve. Union leaders in Scotland and England said they were watching the situation with interest and described the moves as promising. Other organisations such as Head Teachers Roundtable and the charity Education Support also noted that any policy to improve work-life balance should be welcomed, but noted it should apply to all school staff, not just leaders. Full details and further comment on TES Magazine online. Schools Week also reports on comments from Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson on the subject of parental engagement. In a speech at an event run by the charity Parentkind, Ms Phillipson said parents needed an effective route to make their voices heard, but noted that the current complaint system is not working as well as it could, either for parents or for schools. She said the government would continue to guard against mistreatment of school staff and that there can never be any place for abuse. A survey by Parentkind has recently suggested that 2 million children are unhappy at school and almost 1 million feel unsafe. Phillipson told the audience at the event that the results told her that we need change and that parents must be partners in that change. She went on to say, our school's white paper will set out plans to establish clear expectations of schools for parent engagement, and that these expectations would be co-created with schools and parents themselves. Phillipson's comments acknowledged concerns of leaders that parents sometimes expect updates on evenings and over weekends, and that parents make complaints to multiple public bodies, including the Department for Education, Ofsted and the Teacher Regulation Authority, all requiring separate responses. Full details of the speech on Schools Week. Finally, the BBC has covered interviews with young people as the COVID-19 inquiry prepares to look at the impact the pandemic had on children and young people. The report for the inquiry includes individual accounts of 600 people who were under 18 during the pandemic. The accounts on the BBC website include happy memories of time spent with family, the impact of school disruption, social isolation and, for some, bereavement. The inquiry itself will start hearing evidence at the end of this month. Some individuals who spoke to the BBC about the pandemic and how it had affected them had some saying they felt something had been stolen from them during a life-changing set of circumstances, whilst others felt the need to catch up on lost moments. Full details of individual stories can be found online. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Thank you, Jo. I'm really happy to hear that that there's interview data being conducted about responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, including positive things. We know that that was a very difficult time. We know that that was a very unusual time. We know that particularly early on, there was a lot of worry, there was a lot of fear. There were a lot of bereavements that went on throughout and continues today. But for me personally, and I can only speak for myself, it wasn't all bad. COVID-19 opened up a lot of avenues for me as a person, as a professional, to switch up my career, to make some changes, to realize what is and is not important about education, and to kind of realign myself with my own values and start to create a career for myself that is aligned with that. And I do get frustrated, as much as I understand that my experience is not everybody's experience. I do get frustrated when we keep hearing about the pandemic being the worst thing that has ever happened to anybody, and how it continues to be an excuse, let's be honest, for all sorts of things that are going on in schools at the moment. I'm seeing it right now in forums dedicated to kindergarten age children, um, over in the US. And they're saying, oh, parents are quite often saying, oh, these are the kindergarten baby. These are the COVID babies. And it's like, yes, they are literally the COVID babies. They were probably the least impacted by the pandemic of anybody alive. So we are at least starting to move out of being able to use that as an excuse. But for lots of people, and I hope that the inquiry kind of shines a light on this, for lots of people, it gave us the chance to spend more time with family. Where jobs shut down, and we were very lucky that for so many jobs that was able to happen. We were very lucky that the government introduced the concept of furlough, which otherwise doesn't kind of exist in UK employment law. It meant that families could spend time together. It meant that even though there was worry, even though there were concerns, you at least had, many people at least had, that familial unit to be with. I talk a lot about the fact that I had a year 9 through 11 tutor group during the pandemic. And I would check in with my tutees pretty much every day. We would all come together on a Monday morning for tutor period. As usual, we would do that online, and then I would make check-ins with them and their parents throughout the week. A couple of people every day, and I would quite often ask them, are you socializing? Are you talking to people? Are you doing things, other than your schoolwork? And they were absolutely fine. Now, granted, my tutor group, they were, like I said, 13 to 16, or 13 to 15, and boys. So they were very happy just to jump onto their games consoles and game with their friends, because that's pretty much what they would be doing anyway in their free time. And I think talking about lost experiences, talking about feeling like they had things stolen from them, is very interesting framing, because it says a lot about how we as a society construct norms. Because nothing in nature was taken from us during that time. If we're complaining about, I didn't get to go to prom, I didn't get to sit my GCSEs in the same way, I didn't get to do X, Y, and Z. That's all stuff that we are conditioned societally. It's all stuff that we are socialized to believe that we should be doing, and that's what was taken away. But that doesn't mean that you've lost anything, because you still have the opportunity to create memories, to do things that are equally exciting, if not more exciting, as those things that you feel were lost. Now, again, please don't think that I am disparaging anybody who was very seriously ill during COVID. Please don't think that I'm trying to take away from the fact that we did have such a high mortality rate, that so many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of families were impacted, lost loved ones, couldn't attend funerals. I do understand that. I do. But let's not lose sight of the fact that there were good things that could have come from it. And if you lost an experience rather than a person, you can always get that back. You can always use that as a motivator to do something else, to do something different, to have good experiences in your life. I don't know. I recognize that I'm biased, because I enjoyed the lockdowns. I was very privileged to be able to enjoy the lockdowns. I bubbled with family. I was still able to work. I didn't lose anybody. It was very stressful. It was very worrying. But I had a positive lockdown experience. And I think, like I said, I've been able to take that and realize some things and pivot my life based on it. My life right now is completely different, I think, to how it would have been had that not happened. So I personally am grateful for it, if I'm very honest. And while I don't believe in sugarcoating tragedy, while I don't believe that we should gloss over the harsher, the more evil parts of life and pretend that everything is sugar and unicorn and rainbows, I do think that it's important to recognize that there can be good that comes out of tragedy. Even if that good is, I'm not going to go through that again. Even if that good is, I lost the opportunity to do some things, so I'm going to create some opportunities in my future. And I think sometimes, particularly as Brits, we are very prone to the negative. We are very prone to the pessimism. And I think sometimes we have to let that go and find the good, look for the good, actively seek it out so that we don't get kind of lost in this world that we don't control. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about COVID now. And we're going to kind of talk today on the flip side of our show last week. So last week, if you were here, you will remember we were talking about the online abuse of teachers, about how there are, as Joe mentioned in the news just then, there are multiple fora by which parents can complain about us. You know, they can go to Ofsted, they can go to the Department of Education, they can go to all sorts of people if they are unhappy with us. They also have informal channels. They have parents' WhatsApp groups. Other group chat services are available. They have internet fora. They have the local newspaper. How often do you see in the local newspaper somebody complaining because their child was sent home from school wearing the wrong because they were wearing the wrong shoes? You know, there are all sorts of ways that that teachers get hate in the media, and that's what we were focused on last week. This week I want to flip the narrative a little bit and think about how we as teachers can profit from being online, how we can make the most of specifically group chats is what we're talking about today, in order to make ourselves and in order to make our jobs better. So as always, if you've got anything to say on the topic today and you are listening live via Podbean, you can text in. I will read your text out live on air and we can engage that way. I'm really interested in what you have to say. If you are not listening via Podbean, but you are listening live elsewhere or you are listening back, you can in fact interact with me via LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the only public-facing social medium that I have these days because I'm still getting over the fact that I was scraped for generative AI and still trying to figure out now what my social media presence looks like in the aftermath of that. You would have thought that by now I would have gotten over it, but no, I'm just as salty as ever. But I have actually put out a post on LinkedIn today advertising this show. So you can always go and drop me a message there as a comment on that post, or just as is it a DM that you do on LinkedIn? I'm not entirely sure. To engage with the show that way. I'm always interested to hear what everybody has to say. So this show is based around a piece of research. You know, these days my shows are always based around research. I'm not apologizing for that. I'm very much a research-based practitioner. It's based out of a piece of research that comes from South Africa, in fact, which was about sustaining their professional growth, specifically using their phones. So we're going to be talking about group chat technology and how that has been used in this particular setting as a backbone of teacher learning communities, TLCs they're called, among rural accounting teachers. The research itself is by Adura Ngwenga and Bengu, and I apologize if I have pronounced any of those names incorrectly. It was published in 2024 in the South African Journal of Education. So that's kind of what we're basing our chat on today. And I think that this is really important for quite a few reasons. The first is its transferability. Now, I have quite a few, what should we call it, tributaries in the river of my career. I work as a head of classics and a teacher of MFL at a school online. But obviously that's not the only thing I do. I'm here talking to you on a Saturday morning. I go and I give talks at conferences, at CPD events. I am working on my doctorate. I am writing textbooks. There are quite a few things that I do that I pull together into my career. And I think the ability to use group chats for professional development is just as applicable to any of the non-teaching ones as it is to my teaching. I think anywhere that you are in a community, you can use messaging services for professional development. We do it in my doctorate. We have a group, a WhatsApp group, a group chat. We were encouraged, in fact, in our very first lesson to set one up of our cohort, of those of us who were in those first 2 years together, kind of getting through what's called part A of the educational doctorate, the taught part of the doctorate. And we use it quite a lot. Well, I use it quite a lot. I'm forever posting in it. I think perhaps my colleagues are getting a bit sick of me, if I'm very, very honest, but I use it quite a lot for posting conferences that I think are interesting, posting articles that I've read that I think are interesting and relevant. You know, it's a good way to kind of pull together what everybody else is doing that might be applicable to the rest of the cohort. Obviously, if I find an article that I think is only relevant to one person, I'll just text that directly to them. But if you've got something that's good for everybody, you can use the group chat. So that's the first reason that I think this is important, is its generalizability. That's really hard to say. Generalizability. The second reason that this is important is because there are often assumptions made about and around professional development. Professional development often assumes that you have either access to conferences or broadband internet so that you can join them online, or travel stipends so that you're not paying out of your own pocket for your professional development, or some combination of the three. And rural teachers specifically very rarely have that luxury. Rural schools, well, in fact, if we're popping this into a UK context at the moment, no schools really have the money for travel stipends, not in the same way that we used to. Very few schools these days are going to allow a teacher to do a full, I don't know, let's say 3-day conference and pay for their travel and pay for the hotel and pay for their food like we may have done 15 years ago. And I really did not take enough advantage of that. I should have gone to more conferences when I was an early career teacher. But that's a luxury that is very often not afforded. Time these days is a luxury that is very often not afforded. So many CPD activities now take part online in the evenings or at the weekends, that very few schools are now giving teachers time during the school day to attend them. And that then means that you're either choosing to do CPD in your own time or you're not doing it at all. And the thing is, as fewer schools grant leave, if you like, for CPD, it means that more things are moving to weekends and evenings so that people will attend them, which means that more things are available weekends and evenings, which means that schools are less likely to grant that leave. It becomes very cyclical because I myself am guilty of this. I host the MFL Journal Club here at Teachers Talk Radio. We actually have our first meeting of the academic year coming up this Wednesday evening. So if you are not signed up, please head over to tti.org and you can join the mailing list so that I can send out the link to the article and to the meeting. But I host that specifically in an evening. It's usually at 7 p.m., although I am varying up the days and the times a little bit this year, so that people will come. And my mods and I have spent a lot of time talking about when the optimal time to host something like this is going to be, because there are lots of people saying, I don't want to do things in the evenings. I don't want to give up my own time for professional development. This is something that I should be doing during the workday. And it becomes very difficult, I think, on both sides, both as a professional development provider and as somebody wanting professional development, to find the optimal time to be able to attend these things. Now, of course, schools do vary. And I am aware of some senior leaders who are very supportive of their staff undertaking professional development, who will give as much leave as feasibly can be given in order to take that professional development, and those SLTs are wonderful. But each school operates in its own circumstance. Each school does what it can, given its own context. So between all of that, between access, between time, between internet, between cost, you add in the COVID-19 lockdowns, ironically enough, because this is the kind of time stream in which the research that I'm talking about today was taken. You find that face-to-face professional learning communities, PLCs, kind of just vanished. They disappeared. But the learning didn't stop. So this was, again, another really positive thing, I think, that came out of the pandemic, was that no, we weren't going to face-to-face conferences anymore. They were being phased out anyway. We had, in my county, we had a place that was the place to go for your CPD. So CPD providers would hire out this specific building, and it was amazing. You looked forward to going to conferences and things at this specific place, mostly because the lunch that they did was fantastic. And that closed down because it just wasn't financially viable anymore. And this was a long time pre-pandemic. I went to one of the very last courses there during my first couple of years of teaching. So, we're talking a long way pre-pandemic. So face-to-face CPD was already on the decline. And I think the pandemic kind of just hurried that along a little bit. What it did, though, was it opened opportunities for what should be easier access, what should be more cost-effective CPD by putting it online. But we know that because not everybody has access to high-speed broadband, because not everybody has access to a decent microphone and camera, because not everybody wants to sit at a screen, and some people do want to interact with other people, to network, to make those in-person connections that are harder when you're online. It has been seen as being more difficult. It is perceived as being more difficult. But like I said, during this time, the learning, the professional development didn't stop. All it did was change. It morphed into something different. The teachers did what we always do, and they responded. So I want you to imagine a year 12 accountancy teacher in KwaZulu-Natal. The nearest training centre to that teacher is 3 taxi rides away. There is zero budget, and the pandemic regulations have closed the staff rooms down. So this teacher could still feasibly go to the training centre, but can't sit in the staff room. But with no budget and having to take 3 taxis to get to the training centre, and then 3 taxis home again, and then paying for the training itself out of pocket because there's no budget, this teacher realistically has no CPD options. Because who's paying for 3 taxis to get to a conference and then 3 taxis to get back from a conference? Last time I paid to take a taxi to a conference, we got in a crash. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I feel like that's not happening. But at 8 p.m., that teacher is sitting, maybe doing some reading, maybe doing some planning, maybe doing some marking, and her phone pings. And there is a new group chat opened for the accountancy teachers talking about the teaching of inventory valuation. That is professional learning finding a new home right there on that teacher's phone. Throughout this talk, throughout the next sort of 45 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking about PLCs, professional learning communities, and TLCs, teacher learning communities. They are basically the same thing. The literature uses them interchangeably, so I'm going to use them interchangeably. Generally, when we talk about PLCs, we are talking very broadly, so not just about teaching. So writers can have PLCs, professional learning communities. Accountants can have PLCs, professional learning communities. TLC then is PLC, is a professional learning community for teachers, hence the T. And the aim of having any kind of learning community is collaborative reflection. So you're focusing on clustering professionals together, interrogating practice, sharing resources with the aim of improving achievement, both professional achievement and learner achievement, teacher achievement and learner achievement in this case. It's very similar to Wenger's communities of practice concept. If you came to Teachers Talk Connect back in March, this was the table talk that I did in the MFL strand, all about communities of practice. And essentially, the theory behind a community of practice, the theory behind a PLC, the theory behind a TLC is it's good to talk. If you will forgive me for quoting a 90s advert. It's good to be with people who have the same aims and values as you, the same ideas as you, the same struggles as you, or ideally different struggles to you, so that you can help them with their struggles and they will help you with yours. And you've got a place where you can talk to each other, where you can engage, where you can come together. And there is a lot of scholarship. There is work by specifically Darling, Hammond, Stain, Mansfield, and Thompson. And they've done a lot of work which consistently ties this idea of a professional learning community to, or a teacher learning community to better pedagogy and better student outcomes. So we are literature based for knowing that creating these professional communities is the best thing for us. I'm going to pop a caveat in here. And I sort of feel like I have to, as somebody who does deliver training sort of as one of my professional tributaries in my river. I do think it's important not to set up an echo chamber for yourself. I do think it's important not to just be involved in the pedagogical version of old wives' tales, where you're just constantly telling each other to do something because that's how it's always done. You know, we always teach our verbs in Latin by chanting amo, amas, amat. And because that's how we've always done it, that's the best way to do it. Because I don't think that's true. I do think it's important if you're setting up a professional learning community, any professional learning community, you have people within that community who are engaged with literature, who are engaged with research, who are up to date with current practices, so that you don't stagnate. Because it's very easy when you're in an echo chamber just repeating the same concepts, the same ideas, the same pedagogies over and over again to fall behind if you haven't got anybody to say, actually, this research is saying that this is better. So that's just the one caveat that I'm going to kind of add to that. But yeah, in general, as long as you have got people who are engaged and people who are forward thinking, forward looking, trying to figure out what the best practices are, then you are going to get better pedagogy and better student outcomes just by engaging in this practice, just by engaging in this idea of working together.
At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With teachers for students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
The South African backdrop of this particular piece of research is the reason that I chose it, is the reason that I liked it, because South Africa itself gives a really interesting picture of what it's like to operate and create schools in places where education is often quite underfunded. So reported in this article, we have sparse populations, we have unreliable electricity, we have patchy phone networks, we have historic resourcing gaps as a result of apartheid. There are lots of barriers to professional learning within the South African context. And so I think that this research has done a really good job in looking at what barriers to professional learning are and finding out how we can overcome them. It's not just a case of going, oh, there are these issues, isn't that really sad? It's looking at the issues and thinking about how they can be tackled, how they can be resolved. One of the positives, though, that the article came out with was this idea that rural communities have very strong social bonds in South Africa. There is this culture of mutual help, which is ripe for communities of practice, if we're again using Wenger. And if we apply a generative theory of rurality, we can reframe the entire narrative so that the rural actors in these schools are not passive victims of their circumstance, that they are innovative within their constraints. So we're not looking at, oh, I'm in a rural position, therefore I can't do anything. We're looking at, oh, I'm in a rural position, there are these barriers in place. Again, what can I do to overcome them? The fieldwork for this particular piece of research began just as COVID-19 slammed the door on in-person gatherings. And lockdowns very quickly accelerated that pivot. We all saw it, not just in schools, but out of schools as well. We all saw people begin to have weekly Zoom meetings, Skype meetings, whatever they were using, often with family that they would never usually talk so often to. That was one of the big things that I noticed during lockdowns, was I was hearing about these people having, weekly Zoom meetings with random cousins in other parts of the country that they likely wouldn't have spoken to from one Christmas to the next. And now they were talking to them every single week. So again, when we're looking for the good, when we're trying to find the bright spots in despair, that's one of them that can have come out of the pandemic. So yeah, we had increase in Zoom, increase in Teams. We also had an increase in group chats. Everybody had group chats for everything. I think that was a big thing before. There have always been group chats. But I do think that because when the lockdowns were announced, we were concerned about our connection. We were concerned about our ability to not see anybody, that we turned to group chats as a way of keeping that alive. Because all of a sudden I found myself added to all sorts of things. And, we've got to thank the people who were proactive enough to do that very, very early on. And by mid-2020, we saw that teachers were self-organizing group chats in order to post lesson notes, to clarify policy memos, because anyone who was teaching in that time, and anybody who wasn't teaching, because I'm aware that not all friends of Saturday Breakfast are in fact teachers, we were having rapid policy changes within education. Every day, things were changing at both a national policy level. So we were constantly having things updated from the government. You should be doing X, Y, and Z. Eventually, it took a while to get there, but we did start getting them. But then also at individual school levels, we were constantly having things updated as we adjusted to something that we had never done before. In my school, the school that I was teaching in then, I wasn't working at my current school when the lockdown started. We used a partner school in Hong Kong who had gone into lockdown about 6 months before the UK did. And we sort of were able to base our rhythm on what they had done, which was incredibly helpful. But even then, having that base, we were still constantly being updated with, these are the changes that we are now making to make this easier. And there are also groups to commiserate tech hurdles, because not everybody found that transition to being online easy. Not everybody found it as exciting as I did, and I recognize that. And so group chats started popping off about how hard it was to be online, about how couldn't get Teams to open, couldn't get my PowerPoint to load, all of those sorts of things. But we did see them happening. We saw them happening organically. We saw them happening naturally. And for me, that's what's really important, because I talk a lot about theory. I've already mentioned Wenger's community of practice, this idea of joint enterprise, of mutual engagement, of a shared repertoire. I've talked about generative rurality, of the idea of rural teachers being agents of change. But theory doesn't exist in a vacuum. Theory doesn't exist to make things complicated. Theory exists to explain what happens naturally, to explain what people do. And we saw people begin to create communities of practice. We saw people being generative agents of change. We saw the theory coming to life. And for me, that's really, really exciting. So this study that I'm talking about, it was a qualitative case study, and it took an interpretivist paradigm. I need to learn to say that word before I have my Viva. It talked to 15 grade 12 accounting teachers across the Ilembe district, using semi-structured phone interviews and 3 WhatsApp focus group discussions, which I quite liked. You know, they were talking about group chats as a method of communication, and they use group chats as a method of research. I think that's quite cool. They then did a thematic analysis of their transcripts. So they looked at what common themes were coming up in what everybody was saying. And the first theme that came out of this was one of undisrupted collaboration. And the teachers very often voiced relief in having these group chats. One of them said, since the world is moving to the 4th industrial revolution, we use WhatsApp to connect. So we know that industrial revolutions are times of big change. And we've witnessed that within our lifetime, this huge technological leap. You know, just since the mid-90s. I remember the mid-90s playing with a calculator as if it were some kind of like mobile phone, essentially, because it wasn't a thing that was ubiquitous at all. For me, it was a thing of the future. I like sci-fi as a genre, and I would watch lots of sci-fi shows as a kid, and they all had like handheld communication devices, you know, and I used a calculator as one. I used a calculator as what is now currently lying underneath a pile of stuff on my floor because I really need to charge it, something I now take utterly for granted every single day. We've seen that change really, really quickly. Another teacher said, our group lets us ask any questions, and if I know the answer, I support. So there's this idea that there is no stupid question. Nothing is too small to ask. Nothing is too small to talk about. And it kind of profits from that online anonymity. We always see the online anonymity as being framed as a bad thing, don't we? And I did touch on this last week when I talked about how people who will abuse teachers online will hide behind the fact that you can be that you can be anonymous. But that anonymity can also be a positive thing, because it means that if you are known in your school as the tech teacher, the one that knows, but you find something that you don't know about and you're embarrassed that you don't know about it, you can be anonymous within these chats to ask that question and somebody will help you. Tim has texted in, good morning to you. I use my Texas Instruments Little Professor like it was something out of Star Trek. Exactly. Okay. First of all, thank God it's not just me. I was concerned that I'd revealed something about my childhood that might get me carted off by men in white coats later on. So that's good. But isn't it insane that like we all did this? Well, at least 2 of us did this. And we had this idea that there could be a handheld communication device. And then within our lifetime, we've seen it happen. We've seen it develop. We've seen it grow into something, like I said, that is ubiquitous, that is just part of the furniture, I suppose. And that's both cool and scary, I think. So yeah, we've seen that. We've seen how you can use that anonymity to get support that you might be otherwise a little bit embarrassed to ask for. The other positive that kind of helped with this collaboration is that a lot of chat apps have a very low bandwidth. They don't require much data. They don't require much in order to work. And so it meant that when schools were closed, even if you didn't have reliable high-speed broadband, if you were on dial-up, you could still use them. If you had a phone with a limited data plan, you could still use it because you know that it doesn't take much data to send or receive that message. And even people who were skeptical when they were interviewed said, Teams and Zoom, these things are the new norm, and WhatsApp bridges that gap. And for me, it doesn't quite fit into that theme of undisrupted collaboration. But I think that was quite important because Teams and Zoom became very corporate, very professional. It was like being back in your classroom when you were on Teams, whereas when you were on WhatsApp or whatever messaging service you might use, that was like being in the staff room. It was more informal. It was more chatty. And my school, again, the school that I was in, they did very, very well at organizing online meetings. And actually, I've just realized the irony of how I phrased that, because I was about to say that they weren't meetings. They were supposed to be very low key, checking in with each other, making sure that we're all okay. Not formal, not teachery, just us as a community being people together. But for me, and I can only speak from my experience because I didn't really ask anybody else about their experience of it. For me, it felt like a meeting. I just called it a meeting. It still felt like I was at work because we were using the platform that we had been using to work, the platform that I've been using to teach. And so in my head, there was that case of this is what work looks like now. In the same way that if we'd held a meeting in my classroom, I would have felt very worky. And so it was odd to me to be having these kinds of meetings where we were supposed to be checking in with each other and relaxing and just making sure that we were okay in a way that felt very professional and formal to me. Whereas when I opened my phone up to the group chat, that felt a lot less professional because it was my phone. And the people in the group chat were people whose phone numbers I had. And so there was that distinction for me. And I agree with what came out in the data, that Teams and Zoom felt very professional. They felt very classroomy. They felt very worky. They felt normal. Whereas WhatsApp was that bridge. It was that staff room. It was that let's just have a chat about how things are going. That said, very, very grateful to the member of SNT who not only initiated those online meetings every single week throughout any times that we were locked down. It was the first thing that went into the calendar. He hosted them every single week, no matter how many people did or did not want to attend. That was an amazing thing. And that was brilliant leadership, I felt, on his part. So, very, very grateful to him for doing that. The second theme that came out of this analysis of using WhatsApp as a CPD tool was the creation of a culture of sharing and support. So something that really stood out from all of these interviews that the researchers did was this concept of mutual aid. People were posting memo corrections into the group chat. People were circulating department circulars instantly. They just went straight out. Teachers were swapping teaching strategies for each individual accounting topic. One of the researchers said, in the rural context, the group chat medium has become an excellent way to share information, to the extent that even the officials are using this medium. A teacher who was interviewed said, "We share methodology for every single topic. I've improved my practice." And these exchanges, this is the peer-driven CPD. So the continuous professional development that takes out the, in inverted commas, experts. Now, I've already said that I think it's dangerous to create a CPD echo chamber. I think it's dangerous to create a method of CPD that is all, this is how we've always done it, and isn't forward thinking. I do think that you need the, in inverted commas, experts in order to drive things forward. That said, there is a lot to learn from other teachers who have been in the job doing it for a long time. That's exactly why Teachers Talk Radio exists. That's why we are here 7 days a week with different shows for you. We talk from our own experiences. We invite you all in to talk about your experiences. And there is a lot to be learned from the experience of other people. I think it's all about balance, ultimately, isn't it? But what we see in these informal group chat CPD situations are people just sharing good practice, sharing what has worked for them. They're not sharing necessarily the pedagogy behind it. They are not sharing any of the data that drives it. They are just saying, this is what worked for me. And that, of course, always comes with the caveat of, this is what worked for me. It may not work for you, but give it a go. Give it a try. And we saw a lot of that during COVID. We saw a lot of that because, do you remember when people were tired of experts? Hopefully we're over being tired of experts now. And we're realizing again that experts are experts for a reason. But we also, because we were all plunged into this really odd, as much of a cliche as it became, unprecedented time, we did all find ourselves sharing things that worked for us in the hope that they might work for somebody else, in the hope that they might make somebody else's life easier. That was something that I noticed during the lockdowns. Again, trying to pull good things out of what was a horrid time for many people. I noticed how caring people have become. People were always checking in with each other. Stay safe became a kind of motto. Anytime that you would say goodbye to somebody, you would tell them to stay safe. We were checking in, we were sharing things. I noticed that as soon as the lockdowns dropped, that disappeared. We went back to normal, I suppose, which is what people wanted. But I personally really liked that community of care that we were creating around each other, for each other. And part of that was saying, okay, I've just learned that on this video platform, using, I don't know, topic, using this button will create this kind of breakout room where you can put this quiz, and it was really good. I did it in my department. I was not important in my department at all, but I would regularly kind of try things out because I was happy to try things out. And I would say, oh, on our VLE, did you know that we can do this? We can create this self-marking quiz. That might be quite good for if you've got kids who need to do catch-up work. Or did you know that we can post these kind of videos with captions in Japanese that will help with both listening and reading? I was able to just experiment with things and share that. And because, again, I was very fortunate in the position that I was in, because I was bubbled with family. I don't have kids, so I was able to just kind of think a lot about work during that time, think a lot about the technology during that time, and I was able to share what I'd found, what I'd played with, what I'd experimented with my peers, and I enjoyed doing that. Like I said, that was very much a time in my career where I found my pivot. I found what I wanted my career to turn into. But it was peer driven. It was very much, I found things that were cool. I found things that worked. I'm going to share them with everybody else. And I think that became the norm. And I think, sadly, as we've gone back to normal, that is something that we've lost. That is something that has disappeared, that I really wish would make a comeback. Theme 3, one of the saddest themes that comes out of this research, was the infrastructure gap. So a lot of praise for what was happening. And again, we noticed this in the UK as well. A lot of praise for what was happening is tempered by reality. So some teachers, again, remembering that we're in rural South Africa, some teachers didn't have Wi-Fi and data is very costly. So they found it difficult to post lessons online. They found it difficult to attend online worldwide CPD, whereas WhatsApp itself, low data, low energy, so very, very easy to join in CPD that way. Networks are unreliable. One person said that deep rural schools really struggled because they just couldn't get the cell phone signal in order to engage properly. And so we had this promise of ubiquitous learning colliding with airtime affordability, tower coverage, quality of device. Does your device actually support the messaging service du jour? My phone, I was about to say I love my phone. That's not true. I actually don't like having a mobile phone at all. Ironically, for somebody who likes technology, I really do not like having a mobile phone. But my phone is 5 years old now. It's quite old because I didn't like the phone that came with my upgrade, so I just kept the last one. And there are certain apps now that it just does not support, that it's too old to support because the phone companies are creating planned obsolescence. And so if you're not willing to keep increasing how much you're paying for your phone will become obsolete more and more quickly. And so there are these gaps in the infrastructure that are noted, that do exist, that we noted here in the UK. You know, students who maybe had 2 siblings but only 1 computer. That was something that in my school we had to take into account. And so we thought a lot about how we could do lessons that were live for those who could attend live, but were posted to the VLE as well for those who had to work around their siblings' schedule. Parents were also working from home. So let's say that you have 1 parent and 3 children all working from home, taking up the bandwidth. You then also had somebody else watching television, maybe at the same time. TV is connected to the internet, pulling at the bandwidth. So even in the UK, somewhere that we would consider to be relatively technologically advanced, we found these issues. We found these infrastructure gaps. And one thing that I talked to with one of my doctoral colleagues this week about is the fact that we haven't really fixed them. That we're in the UK in 2025 and we still have Wi-Fi dead spots. We still have people not having access to high quality broadband when we know how good technology can be for bringing people together, when we know how important technology is for bringing people together. And that's why, again, throughout this whole show, I've kind of harped on about finding the good things that came out of the pandemic. Because in our rush to get back to normal, we went through this kind of traumatic experience and then nothing changed when we had the opportunity to make really good, really positive changes. Now, none of those themes that came up in the South African research, so the undisrupted collaboration, the culture of sharing and support, and the infrastructure gaps, none of those are unique to South Africa. There is research that comes from the UK about how we have used Twitter as it was to create professional learning communities. One of the things that I found since I gave up all of my front-facing social media apart from my LinkedIn is how out of the loop I feel now. I feel really disconnected from other teachers because I don't have my Twitter, because I don't have my Blue Sky anymore. It's one of the reasons that I'm considering going back to them once I figured out a way to make sure that I can't be farmed for LLMs. In Zambia, they've found ways to blend PD with mobile resources. So again, really making the use of that phone, really making use of group messaging apps. Australian outback communities are relying on video links to create communities of practice. So what we are finding is that no matter where in the world we are, no matter what resources we have access to, we are finding ways to do professional development online. And for those of us who create professional development, it is our responsibility to make that cost effective, to make it worthwhile, to figure out when the best time to do it is. And for those of us engaging in online CPD, we also have a responsibility to still do the networking, to still engage with the presenter in the way that we might if we were live, to really make it a worthwhile community creating resource, a community creating activity, because that's kind of where we're going. It's where we've gone, and it's where we're still going. It's not going away. So we've got to make sure that we really, really do make the most of it.
At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With Teachers for Students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
But to really exploit the idea of using group chats as professional development, we've got to kind of reframe what professional development actually is. Because for a long time, we had it ingrained in us that professional development was a hotel conference room somewhere. It was a slide deck. It was a signature on an attendance sheet. It was a rigid schedule. It was travel costs. But using group chats can kind of flip that model, because it makes CPD on demand, it makes it peer-led, it makes it low cost, and it makes it grounded in reality. You don't get a certificate, which I think is a shame. I never did any CPD that didn't come with a certificate. I don't do anything unless it comes with a certificate, to be fair, because I quite like getting a certificate. But you do get that learning, which I suppose, as I tell my students, is the most important thing. But it's that bottom-up learning, isn't it? It's teachers creating learning for themselves. It's teachers taking agency over their own learning. Because how many times have we sat through CPD, usually at inset, where it's not really relevant to us? It's the same person speaking to the entire school, regardless of what subject you teach, how long you've been teaching for. They are talking about a theory that you've never heard of, using quite impenetrable language to do so. Whereas if you've got a WhatsApp group, even if you've got somebody who is into theory in your WhatsApp group, they are hopefully explaining the theory in a way that is easy to understand, and it's grounded within your classroom. It creates a stream of information, because you get your alerts very, very quickly. So if there's a policy update, you get it straight away. If there's an exam deadline looming, you get that reminder straight away. If there is a new memo from the Department of Education, you get that straight away. It can create an instructional exchange. How did you teach depreciation this year? And then the teacher leaves a couple of voice notes and a link to a PDF and a link to a video. And that's a lesson planned right there and then. It creates an affective space for humor, for venting, for a morale boost. And all of those things then within a group chat, they kind of overlap. And they blur the formal and the informal. So going and sitting very formally at a conference and making notes that you can probably not read the next day when you don't remember anything that you listened to, that's all gone. And what you're doing instead is you're using CPD to help to construct that professional identity. Now, if you've listened to Saturday Breakfast for any length of time, you know that I'm a bit obsessed with this concept of professional identity. But we do become teacher, we do become writer, we do become public speaker. Whatever we do as our job becomes our identity. And I do think it's important to embrace that. I think it's important to lean into that. But there is a downside to it. And I think that there is a danger of group chats feeding into this downside where you are always on. So at least when you were going along and sitting in the conference room, listening to me blather on for an hour about communities of practice, as you have done this morning, once that hour was over, as you will do today, once the show is over, you will then go and do something else. You will go about your life. But if you've got CPD happening through your phone, the phone will always ping, especially if it's your own private phone. It will ping, the message will be there. And we know how tempting it is to check those messages. We know how worrying it can be about being left out of the conversation, about falling behind. And there is that stress about, should I always be in teacher mode? Should I always be available? Which is kind of what a chat-based model of CPD assumes, that you should always be there because you get those constant notifications. You get that guilt over the unread threads. You get the evening intrusions. But like I said before, where more and more formal CPD is going online these days anyway, you are giving up some of your evenings to attend them. Anyone who is coming to MFL Journal Club next week is giving up 7 until 8 p.m. on Wednesday evening to attend it. I'm doing a course next Tuesday in the evening. There's all sorts of things that that will assume as teachers we are willing to give up our free time in order to engage with professional development. And like I said, I don't think that's going anywhere because of that cycle we've already talked about. This idea that things are online so teachers aren't getting day release. Teachers aren't getting day release, so things are happening in the evenings. Things are happening in the evenings, so teachers aren't getting day release. They're not getting day release, so it happens in the evenings, and that just perpetuates. It just keeps going. Because I've done it myself. I've looked at online courses that have happened during the day, and I've said I can't go to that because I can't justify the expense of a supply teacher to do something online. I don't know why I can't justify that expense because it's exactly the same learning. And in fact, for me, it's better learning because I do learn better online than at an in-person conference. But there is just something maybe about the way CPD is ingrained in my brain that says I can't do that. And so I look for the evening ones. I look for the ones that are outside of school time. But as with any barrier, you have to find a way to jump over it because there are barriers to everything. And as I've said a couple of times this morning, if all we do is complain, nothing ever changes and nothing ever gets solved. And in fact, I did a whole show on this, didn't I, a few months ago, where we looked at how people in the 1600s were complaining about exactly the same issues in school that we complain about in 2025. Because we talk a lot, but we don't change anything. So what can we do then to set boundaries so that your group chat isn't always popping off? You can set some quiet hours. You can determine when you are and are not going to engage. Yes, it takes willpower, but you have that right. I'm going to be very honest. I have an issue with scheduled emails and with people insisting that emails are scheduled. Because if I want to work on a Saturday afternoon and send an email on a Saturday afternoon, I feel like I should be able to do that. And I don't know why somebody else who doesn't want to check their emails until 9 o'clock on Monday morning, why their desire supersedes mine. I also don't know why my desire should supersede theirs, to be honest. But this is just, that's something that you would have to agree. But I do think it's possible to decide I'm not going to check my email. I'm not going to check the group chat. I switch off at 8 o'clock and then not do it, not check them. It takes some willpower, absolutely, but it is possible. And if I've decided that that's my cutoff time, if I've decided I'm doing nothing after 8 o'clock, but somebody else decides that they have to do their CPD after they've put their kids to bed at 8 o'clock, they should also be able to jump into the group chat and ask their questions, make their suggestions, post their PDFs. The good thing about technology is that we can individualize it. We can very much make sure that it works for us. You can rotate discussion leads. If one person is always leading the group chat, that can be a lot on that person. It can be a lot of stress on them. It can be a lot of responsibility for them. Similarly, if you've got somebody who takes over the group chat and designates themselves the leader, that can be very annoying. And so if you rotate through discussion leads, if you ask people if they want to lead a discussion and you let people volunteer, that then takes the onus off of one person being the one who always does it, which is positive and negative in both directions. And also means that everybody gets a chance to ask questions that they want to ask. You can also agree on specific tags for urgent discussions. So, you can use tags in group chats just as well as you can on other social media. And you can pop urgent things within that tag so that people know to respond to those first. So if they've only got the bandwidth, either literally or figuratively, to respond to a couple of messages, they can look for the tag and respond to that one, respond to those two. We can also really helpfully lean into the asynchronous respect for it. We can lean into the fact that people engage when they want to engage. People engage when they can engage. People engage when they've got the time to engage. We can make sure that messages are cached offline so that if people don't have access to the data at a particular time, let's say that somebody's on the train and they don't have access to their data right then, they can still catch up with the messages. They don't feel that they get left out. If you're lucky, you could ask for a bit of a stipend. Maybe you could write part of your phone bill off of your tax return because you're using it for work purposes. There are all sorts of ways that we can jump over these barriers. So just to finish, because we are at 10:30, from this piece of research, we have found that group chats can be an incredibly effective, incredibly successful method of professional development, of making sure that people are happy and engaged with what they're doing. What we haven't done yet is found a way to make sure that it is accessible for all and as effective as it should be. Because again, we were so keen after lockdowns ended to get back to normal that we kind of lost sight of the good things that we were doing. So I encourage you, if anybody is interested, set up a group chat and just see how it goes. See whether you can bring group chat CPD into your school, into your workplace, and see if you can make it as effective as possible. I'm going to thank you all very, very much for tuning in today. I hope that you've been able to take something away from today's show. The TTR Humanities event is happening right now in Manchester. If you are there and listening somehow, hello. Tell everybody that I say hello. If you are not there, if you've not been able to attend live, but you are interested, there is in fact a live stream of the whole event starting at 11 a.m. So I do implore you to go out and tune into that if you are a humanities teacher or interested in teaching humanities. If you are a linguist, I hope that you are signed up for TTR MFL Journal Club. Like I said, our next meeting is this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. All of the links to the meeting and the article that we're reading are on the sheet that I have sent out a couple of times. But do let us know if you haven't received that, and I can make sure that you get it. If you are neither a humanities teacher nor a linguist, and you are just here to listen to me on a Saturday morning, I do very much appreciate you. Thank you very much. And I will see you next Saturday. I hope you all have yourselves a great week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.